Hi friends, welcome back to Locally Raised. It's a windy day here, but hopefully you'll still be able to hear me, and I want to give you a tour of my garden today. The September garden is an odd thing. I have a few summer plants that are still yielding. They look terrible. My tomatoes look terrible, but they're still giving me tomatoes. So I'll show you those things, and then of course my fall crops are started. We're about three plus weeks away from first frost here in zone 6B, and so I want to show you what I've been growing. I'll be honest, they are not all successes. I'm going to show you some successes, and I'm going to show you some what I'm calling lessons learned. Um, for context, if you're new here, this is half an inherited garden. We moved here in June. My parents had planted some things for us before we moved, but I've harvested and planted other things since then. So really, I'm wanting to record this for myself also, so that I know what I want out of next year's garden. So let me show you what I've been growing. These pole beans here are the 1,500-year-old cave bean or Anasazi bean. They were an experiment. They're something I've never grown before, and they have just grown vigorously. They've grown so full, and they've not been prone to pests. You can see I've got pods here. These can be eaten when they're young and tender as a whole pod, but I've decided I want to eat them as a dried bean. So I'm going to let these whole entire plants just dry and die off, and I'll let the pods dry on the plant. Oh, they're there. I'll let the pods dry on the plant, and then I'm going to shell them, and I want to cook the beans. And if I like the flavor of them, I'm going to save the rest of the shelled beans as seed for next year, because these were really vigorous and low maintenance, and I like that. So if I like the taste of this bean next year, I will sow a lot more of it, and it'll be a good dry bean that we can eat throughout the winter. And then next to the Anasazi beans are my Brussels sprouts. I promised you honesty. I said I'd show the successes and the lessons learned. These are suffering. All of my Brussels sprouts and all of my brassicas are dealing with cabbage worms. Two kinds of cabbage worms, cabbage looper and cross-striped cabbage worm. Really, the cross-striped has been the worst. You can see here there's a lot of damage for sure, but it's also fruiting. And I think the fruit's going to be fine. On this one, you can see there's some damage up top, but then as we get down lower, things start to look better. So with my brassicas, I'm taking a new strategy to pest management now, and I think I've learned my lessons. I initially started off just picking worms off about twice a week and spraying with neem, because neem has always been my go-to for pests. But I haven't grown a lot of brassicas before, and so I didn't realize that for worms, I really should be spraying with BT. So 2 days ago, or maybe it was even yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I'm losing track, I bought some BT and sprayed, and I am optimistic that I'm gaining ground on these. I thought a couple times about ripping the plants out because the damage looks so extensive, but as I see those little Brussels sprout heads forming, I think they're going to be fine. So I think I'll get to harvest something from this, and I'll just start out spraying BT next year. Here I've got my golden beets. This is a Baker Creek heirloom variety, and they are evenly spaced, but they're definitely maturing at different rates. You can see there's some, for example, this one has a very small head, and then over here, this one's enormous. And I actually think 2 or 3 of these are ready to pull. So I'm going to pull them out so I can give you a look at them. Look at that. It's a pretty color. And of course the greens are good to eat too, so we'll saute those in some olive oil and garlic and salt. And then these, I'll probably end up roasting. one's pretty big. I hope I didn't let it go too long. I don't think so. That one's ready too. So we got 3 beets out of that. And I'm eager to see what they taste like because they're supposed to be a little bit more mild and sweet than red beets. Over here, it's my second round of green beans. My first round was harvested and the plants were pulled. And I planted these again in June, I believe. And these are so pretty. Let me show you one. This is dragon tongue. There it is. The purple goes away when you cook them. They have this pretty flecked color until then. Yeah, there we go. I harvested some of these recently, so there's not a whole lot to show here. And my herbs are still going strong. I think I'll make another round of pesto soon. And I've been continuing to dry herbs inside. Over here, I think my Anaheim pepper might have given me its last. So I'm going to harvest these as well. Here's my broccoli. Once again, you can see there's a lot of damage from worms, but I think I'm making headway on them and I'm encouraged because there's still some heads forming. I mean, that's obviously not a good leaf, but I'm getting something from it. You might notice that these plants are all different sizes. I did a succession planting because I wanted a steady supply of broccoli throughout the fall. Broccoli is one of the few vegetables I can count on my kids eating. So I planted 4 plants 1 week and 4 plants 2 weeks after that, and then a couple weeks after that when I planted these 4 in the front. So hopefully my plan pays off and we are in broccoli for a month or so. And here's my cabbage. It sustained the least damage. Cross-striped cabbage worms seem to prefer the Brussels sprouts and the broccoli. This one's getting a nice little head. I hope these are able to form heads before first frost. Behind me is my butternut squash, and I'm dealing with some powdery mildew, which I'm really disappointed about because I was excited about these squash and they were thriving just days ago. But before I talk about the powdery mildew, I just want to show you a little experiment that I did. I'm always curious about which plants seem to thrive in my raised beds and which ones thrive in ground. So I did a side-by-side planting for my butternut squash. I bought a compact variety. It's the burpee butterbush, something like that. It's a compact variety. It's supposed to be faster maturing and a more compact growth habit than the larger varieties. But I found in this case that the in-ground did much better than the ones that I planted in the raised beds. I'm usually partial to raised beds, but these seem to prefer the in-ground planting. I have mulched here and I haven't mulched in the beds. This area also has clay soil and I think they might prefer that clay. So I'm not going to waste raised bed space on these in the future. My squash are going in ground. I'll show you the size of this one and then the size of the ones that I planted at the same time in my raised bed. So here's one of my in-ground squash plants. Yes, it's not thriving in terms of having powdery mildew, but you can see it's really expanded. And then over here in my raised bed are seeds that I planted at the exact same time. These guys are just tiny. I don't think I'll get much of a harvest from them at all. For scale, here's my hand. I don't expect to get much of a harvest from them at all before first frost. So lesson learned, I will not waste raised bed space on my squash. Here's my row of tomatoes. Some of the plants look worse than others, but they are still giving to me for sure. So I just can't pull them out yet. I think probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks I'll have to. But until then, I'm going to take what they give. This tomato is one I definitely want to grow again. It's a Brandywine tomato, but it's a grafted tomato, which I was not familiar with until this year. So it's an heirloom variety that's been grafted onto a hybrid root system so that it has the vigor and the prolific qualities of a hybrid while still having the fruit of an heirloom. And this plant has just given an abundance. So I know grafted tomatoes cost more if you buy a grafted tomato start, but I would say it's worth it. I'll take you down to the pepper beds. They are still producing, although again, I'm sure I'm weeks away from tearing them out. But I'm going to let them keep doing their thing as long as they can. It's been in the lower 50s in the mornings lately, so I think we're pretty close to these plants being unhappy. But for now, oh, there's another. For now, I'll take what I can get, so I'm going to let them keep developing. And over here, for any parents of young children, is my lunchbox mix. Let me show you one that's ripe. Oh, here we go. It's a snacking pepper. That lunchbox mix would be completely worth it to me, even if I never brought a harvest inside from it, because my kids snack on it. I can't get them to eat peppers when we're in the house, but if they're out in the garden and they can grab one of those little bite-sized peppers and they see a yellow or a red one that's ripened, they'll grab it and snack while they walk around the yard. And so I'll definitely keep growing that lunchbox mix. Over here is something I'm very excited to have going into the fall and the winter. I've never had a hotbed before, and I inherited it with this property, which I feel lucky to have. And so I've just filled it with greens. I've got my butter crunch lettuces, my greenhouse mix salad greens, and my spinach. It has started to drizzle here, but I want to show you one last thing, and that's the Greenstalk. I wanted to give you an update on it because we planted this a month ago, and you can find that video. It's called Late Summer Harvest. So we propagated these strawberries from runners in my strawberry bed, and they are doing pretty well. I'm really happy with them. As I mentioned, we're a couple weeks away from first frost, and I think I'm going to actually try to load this onto a truck. It is not light. I might take apart some of the tiers, maybe not all of them. I'm going to try loading them onto a truck and taking them to a greenhouse. My parents and brother own a retail nursery about a mile from here. And so because these are still young transplants, I want to see if I can overwinter them in the greenhouse and get some fruit from them next June. So let me show you how they're doing. Typically, the recommendation for propagating strawberries is to put a pot beneath runners, tuck them into the soil, and allow them to develop a root system before cutting the cord to the main plant. But in this case, I just clipped and put them in the soil and waited for them to develop roots, and I am pretty happy with the results. There are a few, as you can see, that just didn't make it, but the majority of them are thriving, and I will just replant those few spots next year, and hopefully this will continue to grow, and I'll just have strawberries cascading down. I can't wait. I also want to mention, just as a review of the Greenstalk, that I have loved its water retention. We've been getting rain about once to twice a week here in the past few weeks, And so the rest of my garden has needed watering in between rain. But this, almost every time I check it, the soil is still damp. Because of the way these tiers are stacked, there's so little soil exposed to sunlight and it just retains water. So I've only watered this maybe once or twice in the last month because every time I've checked it, it's retained its rainwater. So I'm really happy with that. I would buy another one of these. I just realized that I never properly circled back to discussing that powdery mildew on my squash plants. The lesson I've learned there is that I'm going to tear out plants in the future the moment I see powdery mildew. I tried pulling off the effective leaves and spraying with neem for protection, and it just spreads so fast. I wish I hadn't tried to preserve any plant that I saw it on. I also, of course, won't plant squash in that same spot next year because I know that powdery mildew overwinters. So I think I'll be rearranging a lot of things in this garden next year. Thanks so much for joining me for a windy day in the garden. If you too are tending a fall garden right now, I wish you the best of luck. I hope everything yields beautifully for you. Please remember to like and subscribe. I really want to keep sharing these videos with you and keep sharing this process of producing food from my backyard. I'll see you next week.